So from my analytics, I see that a lot of people don't actually make it more than 15 seconds into my videos. But today's video is so important that I'm going to give you the bottom line up front, the too long didn't watch version right now. If you're working and you have not started a Roth IRA and you're not saving into a Roth IRA, do it immediately.
Do it! Come on! Do it now!
Not starting my Roth IRA earlier when I first started working is one of my biggest financial regrets. You see, when I was younger, I always thought I was one, very handsome, and two, very smart. I was wrong on both accounts. You guys have already seen over and over again in the recent videos how when I first started working, I spent a bunch of my money on cars. How instead of helping my parents or investing that money, I went and got loans to pay for cars that I've always wanted since I was young. And like I mentioned in my last video, my parents were never very financially educated and they were never taught how to plan for their retirement. And not to blame them, because I could have really gone off and done the research myself and then taught it to them instead. But we just didn't really talk about finances very much in our family. And particularly when it came to retirement, it was kind of always just assumed that my parents were going to keep working. They never really talked about taking retirement or saving for retirement or anything like that. They just had the idea that they were just going to keep working. And so it came in as an absolute shock to me when in mid-2018, mom's personality started to change, and later in the year she was diagnosed with dementia at the young age of 61. I remember in November of 2018 when mom and dad sat me down and said, "Mom is going to have to stop working," and they asked me, "Can we afford retirement?" She had been making a lot of mistakes at work and a lot of her coworkers noticed that something was wrong. I also noticed that her balance and coordination were deteriorating. She was having mood swings, she was not able to sleep, and overall just losing her function as a person. Now at the time, dad was still working and I thought that everything was going to be okay since mom could stop working and dad and I could support her together. Little did I know how drastically this illness would affect her and how much it would impact our family. I remember specifically thinking, it's okay that mom is out of work. Dad and I are still maintaining two incomes for the household. But little did I know that just a few months into 2019 after mom stopped working, that dad wouldn't be able to balance the pressures of taking care of her and also going to work at the same time. I really should have seen it coming, but I really just didn't. There were some nights that were so bad where mom was going through these manic episodes where in order just to find some peace and quiet, dad would have to go out into the Land Cruiser and sleep in it in the driveway. And so those nights were incredibly long, and as the pressure started mounting, dad also started having health issues. He stopped being able to sleep and eventually he had to stop work as well. And he even ended up in the hospital a couple times due to a couple scares, and somehow even developed pneumonia, for which he had to go to the hospital for a couple of days. And so here I was in the span of less than a year, going from a period of thinking about cars, spending all my money on cars, to all of a sudden both parents are out of work and now I'm being looked to support the family. It was truly devastating and life-changing for me. Looking into their finances, try to figure out exactly what they had, what assets they had, what they still owed, and try to figure out whether or not we would be okay was extremely stressful. And then looking into it and finding out such devastating information, like they had taken out huge lump sums from their IRAs early and paid huge penalties to do so, just to keep that cash sitting in a low interest savings account doing nothing with it. Or finding out how they had contributed money to this other retirement account, but instead of investing that money, they had left it sitting in cash in the account for almost a decade. I was shocked, to say the least, and I was just absolutely devastated to think that I had the knowledge and the experience to help them, but because I hadn't looked into it until now, that this was their reality. And what really reminded me of this week is I was going through some of my old hard drives, trying to pull out old pictures and footage, looking for anything that could help me make upcoming videos that I have in mind. And while I was searching through all my stuff, I ended up coming across this folder. It was a folder hidden in a folder hidden in a folder. I guess I really didn't want anybody to accidentally come across it, but the folder was full of pictures of me taking close-ups of my hair. For those of you that have been following me for some time, you know that a couple years ago I made a video specifically addressing my hair loss and talking about when I first realized that I was losing my hair, that it was such a devastating thing. In fact, some of the footage at the beginning of this video, some of you may recognize. It's the same footage that I used in that video to kind of talk about how much I loved my hair back then. And as I was going through these pictures and just thinking back on just how devastated I was when I started noticing and realizing in my early 20s that my hair was starting to go, I mean, it really should have been no surprise. Like I shared in that past video, I look at my dad, I look at my grandfather, and both of them were bald. So what made me think that I wasn't gonna eventually get there also? But that's just the fact of the matter. The way that I live my life, and a lot of us tend to live our lives, is even though we have signs of all the upcoming impending things all around us, a lot of us don't pay attention to them. Almost living our lives in a way where it's like the end will never come, that time will never come, those things will never happen, or somehow that those things don't apply to us somehow. And so that's why I think things like my hair loss were so devastating to me. Because even though all the signs were there and I had every opportunity to know that that's what was going to happen, I chose not to pay attention to them. But in fact, the writing was on the wall the whole time, kind of giving me an indication of what was coming in the future, but instead of paying attention, I just ignored it. And so when the time came, I was shocked, I was blown away, and I was devastated by what was happening to me, as if it took place all of a sudden. And so when it came to my parents' health and being forced to look at their finances, it was the same type of shock and the same type of devastation that I felt. For so long, I had just lived how I wanted and kind of spent my money my own way and not really paying attention to anything beyond that. That even though I had every opportunity to discuss with my parents and figure this out before the time came, I just hadn't done that. You know, thinking that that time would be a long way off, that we would have a lot more time in the future to eventually discuss those things and eventually get their affairs in order. But that's why I want to hammer this point home for you guys so much. The future is uncertain. And a lot of you might be like, yes, that's obvious. But a lot of us live our lives in a way where that's not very obvious. Thinking that we can put this or that off until sometime in the future. Thinking that that day will never come because, you know, all of us are still young and relatively healthy. But that's the point I want to hammer home. That one, the future is absolutely uncertain, and two, there are people in our lives or people we have yet to even meet that will come to depend on us and that we will care more than anything about. And so with those two absolute certainties, it is imperative, it is so utterly important that we do everything we can in our power at this present time and not waste any time at all to prepare for that. Which is why this is one of my biggest regrets. Aside from not looking into my parents' finances earlier, not helping them figure that stuff out, not looking at where they were investing their money and not just letting it sit in cash, but one of my biggest regrets is not handling my own situation first as early as possible so that I wouldn't have to worry down the road when things went sideways like they are going now. And I just said sideways, but the truth is it's not sideways at all. This is the course of life. This is a certainty. These are things that every single one of us can expect to go through at some point in our life. And so this isn't even about amassing wealth or getting rich, although those are very possible outcomes if you follow the steps that I'm going to lay out in a moment here. But this is about taking care of those that are closest to us. And like my mom always told me, the best way that I have of taking care of those that I love and those that I care about is to first take care of myself and make sure that I am okay. And so now to get into the practical steps of what you guys should do. I'm not a financial guru. I'm not any sort of financial professional. I'm just a guy telling you guys what I've learned for myself. So I'm going to go over some things now. I'm going to gloss over some of the details. If you guys ever want more information, you could always ask me and I can make more videos about them in the future if you're interested. Or there's a ton of information online available for free. But the practical steps I'm going to lay out for you guys here are: 1, make sure you first pay off all high interest debt. Any credit card debt, any super high interest debt, mortgage or car payments usually don't fall into this category, but that's arguable depending on who you talk to. But for absolute sure, if you have any high interest credit card debt, any high student loan debt, make sure that you put all your attention to those things first. The second thing to do, you can kind of balance this one with the first one while you're paying off your high interest debt on the first step. You could also be doing step 2, but step 2 is to make sure that you build up a sizable emergency fund. And you know, again, the details here vary depending on who you talk to. Some people will say 3 months of expenses, some people will say 6 months of expenses, but whatever it is, just make sure you build up a sizable emergency fund so that in the event that you lose your job or some emergency happens, that you have cash to cover it. What you don't want to do is have to rely on credit cards to hold you over during those times. So work on steps 1 and 2 first, but whatever you do, do everything in your power to avoid credit card debt. Out of anything that you can do, credit card debt is the #1 most destructive destructive force when it comes to financial freedom. And so now for step 3, when it comes to the Roth IRA and investing, the absolute most important thing when it comes to investing is 1, consistency, and 2, time. It's a lot like what I've shared with you guys in the past. When it comes to working out, when it comes to investing, there is no shortcut. There is no quick way. It's about consistency, and it's about giving it enough time to see those results. And that's why this is my biggest financial regret, because the truth is, I didn't start my Roth IRA until 10 years after I received my first paycheck. I did a rough calculation as to what that 10 years of contributions could have grown into by the time I can touch that money and retire. And with some pretty basic assumptions around the calculation, inflation, it turns out to be nearly $500,000 that I missed out on by just not contributing over those first 10 years. If the assumptions held true, what would have been around $45,000 worth of contributions if I had started right at 21 would have grown into almost $450,000 by the time I turned 60 if I had put that money in when I could have. And so specifically for those of you that are in my biggest demographic, ages 25 to 34, if you do not have a Roth IRA or you are not contributing to a Roth IRA right now, please, 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 I beg you, go right after this video or even stop it right now, go and open a Roth IRA and contribute as much as you can, because truly whatever you can put into it now, your future self will thank you. And so now a couple things about what makes Roth IRAs so good and why you absolutely should open one if you don't have one. The very first thing is Roth IRAs are actually funded by after-tax dollars, meaning this is money that's already in your pocket, it's already deposited in your bank account. Your taxes have already been taken out of it. And so because of that, the government allows this instrument, this Roth IRA vehicle, for you to put money in, to invest that money, allow it to grow, and when it comes time to take that money out at retirement at the age of 59 and a half, that money is never taxed ever again. And on top of that, because this is after-tax money in your pocket that you're putting it into this account, like me, I take that money and I went and modded my car with, and I bought wheels and I bought seats instead. You could have done that, but instead, because if you put money into your Roth IRA, the government allows you to take your original contributions, not the earnings, but the original contributions that you put in. You can take that out at any time for whatever reason. Meaning if somehow you made the terrible decision, I don't encourage anybody to do this, but if somehow you needed that money, say an emergency, or you just wanted to go buy a car or something, you could actually reach into that account and take that original contribution amount back out without any penalty. And so because of this fact, it is so good that there's a lot of restrictions around how much you can contribute to a Roth IRA and how much money you're allowed to make to be able to contribute to a Roth IRA. Essentially, if you make too much money, you can't contribute directly to a Roth IRA. Now, there are ways around that and they're completely legal, but it's safe to say that if you are making below that maximum threshold of being able to contribute directly, you want to be able to do that because one, that means that your tax rate right now is low because you're not making that much money yet. And so essentially you get taxed now while you're in a lower tax bracket, and then in the future you can expect your earnings to continue to increase as you get further and further in your career, and when you retire, that money is never taxed again. It's just really that good. And the fact is the government limits how much money you can put into the account each year. For 2020, the limit is $6,000. But if you miss the contributions for prior years, you can't just go back and make up for it. The ship has sailed. What's done is done. Which is why I'm urging all of you, even if it's not the maximum of $6,000 or nowhere close to it, at least put in what you can. Every single dollar that you can put in as early as possible, as often as possible, is gonna help you down the road. And lastly, after you put your money in, what do you invest in? A lot of people get confused here. You know, what stocks should I buy? Do I buy bonds? Do I buy mutual funds? But whatever you do, please just do not make the mistake that my parents made of just leaving it sitting in cash. Invest it in something, anything, literally anything is better than putting it in just cash. And the truth is, for me, I like to keep things very simple. One, you want to keep the fees down, and two, you want to be as diversified as possible. You hear this word diversified over and over again. Essentially, being diversified means not to put all your money in one place. If you buy stocks, you don't want to put all of your money into one company. In the event that that company goes under or goes out of business, then all of your investment is gone. Now, thankfully, there's a lot of funds out there that keep the costs low and also help you automatically diversify. There's a lot of very high quality funds, depending on what brokerage you go to and open up your account at, that will provide you these funds that help you automatically diversify your money across sometimes thousands of different companies. And so if you've watched at this point in the video, I'm assuming that some of you want recommendations as to what to buy and where to put your money. I recommend these two funds, especially if you're in the age range of 25 to 34 or below. This is a retirement vehicle. We're not supposed to touch this money until we retire. So at the age of 59 and a half is when that usually happens, meaning we have a lot of time and don't need to worry about the daily ups and downs of the stock market and what's happening at this moment. And so I recommend these two funds because this top one, VTI, essentially spreads your money across thousands of US domestic companies. And then this other one, VXUS, essentially spreads your money across thousands of companies that are not in the US. And the great thing about these two funds is the fees are very, very low. Essentially, to own one of these funds, you have to pay these management fees to the companies that run them. And the fees are extremely, extremely low, some of the lowest in the industry. And so I recommend just buying into these two funds, maybe like a 60-40 mix, 60% US, 40% not. But the important thing is to make sure you open your account, you put your money money in early, you buy into these funds, invested, and don't look at it, don't touch it, and really just stick with that schedule. Consistently investing, consistently buying the same funds, and don't worry. Because in the end, by being consistent, time is on your side. So definitely let me know some feedback. What did you guys think about this video? This is the longest video I've ever made, so if you've watched to this point, then man, I apologize. And thank you guys again for always supporting me. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next week.